Well, it seems I'm next in line. My name is Ilze Bebris, and I'm an artist. I'm a visual artist. I work primarily in sculpture and installation. And that work over there, those 5 skirts, that's my work. And I'm just bringing that up because much of my work that revolves around the ideas of feminism comes from an interest in narrative. And that's the topic I want to talk a little bit about tonight under the invitation to consider what would it take to reorient social values about gender to support meaningful equality. I gave that quite a bit of thought. In fact, I found all 3 of these questions incredibly provocative, and it took me a long time to find a way of coming around to talk about these issues. Under the idea, though, of narratives, I want to talk a little bit about the narratives that we live with. Most of the narratives that we operate under are invisible because they are commonly shared in the sense that we all partially understand them or believe them to be true, or we use them as our way of negotiating and operating in the world, much in the way that we use the rules of the road and agree to the rules of the road when we drive our cars around, so that we don't bump into one another. These narratives kind of work the same way. So the narratives that I'm thinking about are the narratives that tell us who we are as gendered individuals, who we are as a culture and as a society. And these narratives serve to create culture. The argument is that culture is just a collection of stories, and they are the stories that we all believe in. So some of those narratives that we might want to think about are the narratives, the grand narratives, which we used to all agree on before the advent of what we recognize now as postmodernism, when we started to realize that not everyone believes the same kind of stories, and not everyone believes that those are the stories that form them. So, for instance, some of the stories that we believe that formed us and continue to inform us as a culture are the stories about very simple issues about gender supremacy. Boys do this. Men grow up to be great and strong. They are the warriors. Women are the keepers of the fire, the keepers of the children, the nurturers. And that is the way life is. You don't mess with those, because that tells us how we are, who we are, and the roles that we play. It keeps us all on the road. We're driving on the right or on the left, but these narratives will keep us where we need to be. So those narratives percolate down into finer stories. When we start to look at what it is that men do and women do, and those are gendered issues, if we start to look at those narratives and we look at them in the context of those of us who don't quite fit within those narratives, or those of us who want to push the boundaries of those narratives, they start to break down. Because, of course, they don't have a lot of room for people who are somewhere in between the stereotypical male and the female. Whether that's a question of desire, whether it's a question of expression of your own sexuality, or whether it's a question of wanting to move beyond those parameters. So those are the stories that we tend to live with. Examples. I think that if I say to you Cinderella, everyone's going to get this one, right? So we think about one of the most simple stories that children share. Cinderella, and we all know what happens. Poor old thing there, she is left cleaning up while her sisters go off to the ball and are off to meet Prince Charming. But Cinderella has a fairy godmother. And I'm mentioning these things because these are all very important parts of this narrative. They all tell us about the forces that come to bear to create this world. So if we look at Cinderella, she's disenfranchised from the word go. She's poor, she's a female, she's motherless. She is thrown into a situation where she is the daughter who gets thrown into the kitchen to do the work, while the other 3 girls get to go off And they get to Facebook, they get to party, and they get to shop Prada. Cinderella, in the meantime, is left doing all the dirty work. Now, what happens, of course, is the invitation goes out from the prince. And, of course, this is nothing more blatant than the selection of the bride. And considering the narrowness of the roles when this story was first popularized, women had a lot of choices. You were either born into wealth or you were born into poverty. It's not all that different now. Your options, if you were born into wealth, was to be chosen as an object of desire for someone else who had wealth, and that someone else was a prince. And you got to be the princess, and life was good. As for what happened to the other sisters and the other women, well, no one ever talked about that. But the competition was fierce. If you think about Brother Grimm's version of this fairy tale, you might remember that the three sisters each competed to fit into the shoe that was brought around after the ball. And each of those girls did something to make herself fit into the mold that was the princess. One of the more radical ones was where one of the sisters, counseled by her mother, was told to snip off her toes so that they would fit into the shoes. Another was counseled to cut off her heel. So we're being encouraged to mutilate ourselves. Does that ring a bell for anyone right now?
Oh, yes.
We are encouraged to make sure that we fit into the mold. Not that the mold might not be a one-size-fits-all. Not that the mold may not be conducive to our survival. Those issues aren't addressed, but we need to make it fit. So then we have the paperback, the Cinderella story in all its glory. And we know that there's only one winner. And what happens to the princess when she marries the prince? Well, we don't hear any more from her. The prince goes off and has his exploits and lands and all those kinds of things. The princess's function is to become queen. And what does she do? She reproduces. And she sits next to the king on a good day. And if she's not well favored, well, we know what Henry did with all of his wives and princesses. It was not a great story. So there's the narrative that we have wound up with. And we all know it. And Disney does the favor of reproducing it for us over and over and over again. So the question is, what are the counter-narratives? Well, thanks be to a wonderful Canadian. Unfortunately, he's not a woman artist, but he is a male artist. Robert Munch. And he is of a feminist sensibility that we as women and as a culture need to cultivate. And back in 1978, I think it was, he published The Paperback Princess. And I think most of us have some familiarity with it. The princess is sitting in her castle, and she's being courted by Ronald the Prince. Ronald the Prince is a pretty self-absorbed kind of guy. Anyhow, there's a dragon. The dragon comes along and burns down the princess's castle, and she threatens her kingdom. Well, action needs to be taken. So the princess, who has lost all of her goods, including her beautiful dresses, in the spire that the dragon has created, puts on a paper bag and goes out to hunt down the dragon because he has created evil and is threatening her kingdom and the lives of all of the people within that kingdom. Or shall I say princessdom. Anyhow, she goes off. She chases the dragon around until he runs out of fire breath and skulks away. And then she comes back and presents herself to Ronald. And she's now ready to take on this business of being a princess. Well, Ronald sees her in the paper bag with her hair all asunder and her no makeup, and she's covered in ashes and bruised and beaten up from chasing off this dragon. And he takes a look at her and says, "I don't think so. Come back when you look more like a princess." Well, paperback princess doesn't have any time for Ronald, and so she sends him off. And she continues on as the paperback princess. Now, we hope that the paperback princess has a world where she can grow up, and those values are the ones that count, the ones that make life worth living. Listening to what Bernadine had to say and talking about the statistics of women's situation as artists and women's situation the world over, which have not changed deplorably despite all the activity that women have started in terms of support, in terms of political action from the 1970s on, the change has not been appreciable. I think what is appreciable is the stories that we're hearing from the third world, the developing world, from Central America, from Afghanistan, and particularly now, if you've at all been reading the papers at all, in the days and weeks that surround International Women's Day, our focus is once again turned towards those kinds of issues. And I hate to say it, but things are not getting any better. In fact, they are getting a whole lot worse. So the question then seems to be, what are the belief systems, as Bernadine alluded to, that keep us going or that perpetuate the kinds of situations that have shackled women for many years? And it's not only women who are shackled, it is our children, it is the people who are our partners, it is our husbands, it is our fathers, it is our sons. When we perpetuate or allow these kinds of belief systems to be perpetuated, nothing is really going to change. We can throw money at it, but unless there is a fundamental change in the way women are treated and regarded, things are not going to change. So I think it's time that we started looking at those narratives. It's very easy to say, well, we need to make those changes. But I think until those narratives change, those belief systems, those fundamental ways in which we see women, whether we see them as partners or whether we see them as objects, whether we see them as fully sexualized people, or whether we see them as objects simply for sexual consumption. Those are the fundamental kinds of issues that we need to deal with. And until we can change those narratives and go out and find new narratives and encourage our daughters and our sons to create those in coordination with others, not to fold into an androcentric universe, a universe where the male point of view is the one that we all agree to, whether we are men or women, and if we continue to fold into that particular narrative, I don't think we'll be able to make the changes that we can. So my invitation to everyone here is to reconsider those kinds of narratives that we've been under. Thank you.